Elena Marsh's boots broke through ice with every step, and behind her, something was running. Not walking. Running. Branches snapped in the dark like small bones, and the sound was getting closer, not farther. She had left her cabin only 20 minutes ago, because she heard a howl so loud it rattled her window glass, and now she could not remember which direction led back home. Snow fell in fat, blinding sheets. Her flashlight beam shook as her hand shook. She had grown up in this mountain town, had walked these woods 100 times, and yet tonight the trees looked like strangers, standing shoulder to shoulder, watching her. She stopped moving. If she stopped, maybe whatever was following her would stop too. Her breath came out in short white clouds. The wind died down for one strange, silent second, and in that second, she heard breathing that was not her own. She turned around slowly. Nothing was there. Just snow, endless snow, and the black shapes of pine trees leaning in the wind. Elena let out the breath she had been holding, and almost laughed at herself. She was a grown woman, 26 years old, letting her imagination turn a storm into a monster. She turned back toward what she hoped was the direction of town. That was when she saw it. A wolf, but not like any wolf she had ever seen in a nature documentary or a picture book. It was the size of a full-grown deer, its fur pure white, so white it seemed to glow faintly even in the darkness. Its eyes were pale gold, and they were fixed directly on her, unblinking, intelligent in a way that made her skin prickle. Wild animals did not look at people like that. Wild animals looked away, or they looked hungry. This wolf looked like it was thinking. Elena's first instinct was to run, but something in her stopped that thought before her legs could obey it. The wolf had not moved. It stood 20 feet away, framed by falling snow, tail low and still, watching her with a patience that felt almost human. "Please," she whispered, not even sure who she was talking to. "Please don't." The wolf tilted its head slightly, as if her words confused it. Then, slowly, it stepped backward into the trees, and vanished, into the white curtain of the storm. Elena stood frozen for a long moment, her heart pounding so hard she could feel it in her throat. She should have felt relieved. Instead, she felt something stranger, something like disappointment, as if she had been abandoned rather than spared. She turned to keep walking, and the ground gave way beneath her. She had not seen the drop, hidden under a fresh layer of snow, a small ravine carved by years of melting ice. She fell hard, tumbling down a slope of rock and frozen brush, snow filling her mouth and stinging her eyes. When she finally stopped, pain shot up through her ankle, sharp and immediate. She tried to stand and collapsed back down with a cry. The storm did not care that she was hurt. It kept blowing, harder now, and the temperature was dropping fast. Elena knew, with the cold clarity of someone who had grown up around winter, that she did not have long. Maybe an hour before the cold became truly dangerous. She reached for her phone. No signal. Of course not. Not out here. She pulled her coat tighter and tried to drag herself up the slope using her hands, but every movement sent fire through her ankle. Panic began to creep in at the edges of her mind, quiet and patient, waiting for her to give it room to grow. Then she heard footsteps. Not human footsteps. 4 soft, deliberate paws crunching through snow, coming closer. The white wolf appeared at the top of the ravine, looking down at her. Elena's breath caught. She expected fear, and some part of her did feel it, cold and sharp in her chest. But there was something else too. Something she could not name. A strange sense that this animal had not left her at all. It had only stepped back to watch from a distance. The wolf made its way down the slope with careful, sure steps, as if it had walked this exact path many times before. It stopped a few feet from her and lowered its head, sniffing the air, studying her injured leg. "I'm not going to hurt you," Elena said, her voice trembling. "I don't even think I could if I tried." The wolf huffed, a sound almost like a laugh, and Elena blinked in surprise. Wolves did not laugh. She must be losing her mind from the cold. It circled her once, then lowered its body beside her, close enough that she could feel warmth radiating from its thick white fur. She hesitated only a second, before leaning into it, too cold and too desperate to question her own survival instincts. The wolf did not flinch. It simply let her lean against its side, as still as a mountain, sheltering her from the worst of the wind. "Why are you helping me?" she asked quietly, half expecting no answer. Of course, because it was an animal. And animals did not answer. But its golden eyes flicked to hers, and for one impossible moment, Elena could have sworn she saw understanding there, deep and old and sad. They stayed like that for what felt like hours, though it was probably only 20 or 30 minutes. The wolf's body heat kept the worst of the cold away, and slowly, Elena's panic settled into something calmer, something closer to trust. She had read once that people who were freezing sometimes felt warm right before the end, a dangerous trick of the body. She wondered if this was that, some final comforting hallucination before the cold took her. But then, in the distance, she heard something else, a low, rolling howl, different from the first one that had drawn her outside. This one carried something urgent in it, something like a call for help. The wolf beside her lifted its head sharply, ears pinned back, body suddenly tense. It stood, nudging her gently with its nose, urging her to move. Elena understood, somehow, that it wanted her to get up, to keep going, that staying here was no longer safe. She gritted her teeth and forced herself upright, using the wolf's solid body for support. Every step on her hurt ankle was agony, but the wolf stayed pressed against her leg, guiding her, taking her weight when she stumbled. They moved through the trees together, an unlikely pair, a hurt woman and a massive white wolf, both moving with strange urgency through the storm. Elena did not know where they were going, but she trusted the wolf completely now, in a way that made no logical sense, and yet felt more certain than anything she had felt in years. After what felt like an eternity of stumbling through snow and pain, she saw a shape ahead, dark against the white world, an opening in the rock face of the mountain. A cave. The wolf led her straight to it, practically pulling her the last few steps by staying pressed to her side. Inside, the wind disappeared almost entirely. The cave was small but dry, and someone, or something, had clearly used it before. There was a ring of old stones near the entrance, blackened by long-ago fires. Elena collapsed against the cave wall, exhausted, her whole body shaking from cold and pain and fear all mixing together. The wolf settled beside her again, close enough to share its warmth, and for the first time since she had left her cabin, Elena allowed herself to believe she might survive the night. "Thank you," she whispered, resting her head back against the stone. "I don't understand any of this, but thank you." The wolf's ear twitched at the sound of her voice, and it made a low sound in its throat, almost gentle, almost like it understood every word. Elena did not know how long she slept, curled against the warmth of that strange, magnificent animal, but when she woke, gray morning light was creeping into the cave, and the storm outside had softened into a quiet, steady snowfall. She turned her head, expecting to see white fur beside her. The wolf was gone. In its place, oddly, was a heavy wool blanket she did not remember bringing, folded neatly beside her, as if someone had draped it over her shoulders sometime in the night, and then carefully removed it before leaving. Elena stared at it for a long moment, her mind refusing to make sense of what she was seeing. Wolves did not carry blankets. Wolves did not fold things. She pushed herself up, testing her ankle. It still hurt, but the swelling seemed less severe than she expected after a night in the cold. She wrapped the blanket around her shoulders and limped to the cave entrance, looking out at the snow-covered forest, searching for any sign of the animal that had saved her life. There were paw prints leading away from the cave, deep and clear in the fresh snow. She followed them with her eyes as far as she could, until they disappeared around a cluster of pine trees. And there, for just a second, at the edge of the tree line, she thought she saw a figure, not an animal, a person, tall, still, watching her from a distance, the way the wolf had watched her the night before. Elena blinked hard, snow catching in her lashes, and when she looked again, the figure was gone. She did not know what she had just seen, or if her exhausted mind had imagined it entirely. But one thing was certain in her heart, clear and undeniable, despite how impossible it sounded. Whatever had saved her life last night, it was not simply a wild animal passing through the storm. It had been waiting for her. And somehow, she knew this was not the last time their paths would cross. The bell above the door of Marsh's general store rang sharply as it was pushed open, and Elena looked up from the register just as a gust of cold air swept inside, carrying snowflakes across the wooden floor. She had been back on her feet for 3 days now, her ankle wrapped tight, and she had told no one about the wolf, the cave, or the strange folded blanket she still kept hidden under her bed like a secret she was not ready to share. The man who stepped through the door made the entire store go quiet. He was tall, broad-shouldered, dressed in a dark coat that looked far too fine for a small mountain town like this one. His hair was black, his jaw sharp, and his eyes, when they briefly met Elena's, were an unsettling pale gray, almost gold in the store's dim lighting. Something about those eyes made her chest tighten, though she could not explain why. "Afternoon," said Peter, the elderly man who ran the hardware counter beside Elena's register, his voice a little too cheerful in the sudden silence. "Don't believe we've had the pleasure, stranger." The man's gaze moved slowly around the store before settling again on Elena. "I'm looking for a place to stay, somewhere quiet." "Well," Peter said, glancing nervously at Elena, "the inn on Maple Street should have rooms this time of year. Not many folks visiting in the dead of winter." The stranger nodded once, but he did not move toward the door. Instead, he walked closer to the counter, closer to Elena, and something about the way he moved, controlled, deliberate, almost predatory, reminded her sharply of the wolf in the woods. She gripped the edge of the counter without realizing it. "You're hurt," he said quietly, his eyes flicking briefly to her wrapped ankle, visible just above her boot. "I fell," Elena said carefully, "during the storm a few nights ago." Something flickered across his face, so quick she almost missed it. Recognition. Or maybe concern. "That storm was dangerous. You're lucky to be standing here." "I had help," she said before she could stop herself. His eyes sharpened, just slightly. "Did you?" It wasn't quite a question, and Elena felt a chill crawl up her spine that had nothing to do with the winter air still swirling in from the open door. She studied his face, trying to place why he felt so familiar, why her instincts were screaming at her to pay attention to this man, in a way they never had for anyone else in this small, unremarkable town. "My name is Cale," he said finally, offering nothing more. No last name, no explanation for why a man dressed like money had wandered into a general store in the middle of nowhere. "Elena," she replied, and shook the hand he offered. His skin was warm, almost too warm, like heat radiated from somewhere deep inside him. She pulled her hand back a little faster than was polite. Cale did not seem to mind. He purchased a few basic supplies, paid in cash, and left without another word, the bell above the door ringing again as the cold rushed back in behind him. Peter let out a long breath once the door had shut. "Strange one, that. Never seen him before in my life, and I know everybody who comes through this town." Elena said nothing, but her eyes stayed on the window, watching Cale's tall figure move down the snowy street with unhurried, powerful steps. There was something wrong about him, or maybe something right, in a way she could not yet understand. Either way, she knew, with the same strange certainty she had felt in the cave, that she would see him again. She did not have to wait long. That evening, Elena walked home from the store, as the sun disappeared behind the mountains, the sky turning a deep bruised purple. Her cabin sat at the edge of town, closer to the tree line than most people preferred, but she had always loved the quiet of it, the way the forest pressed close without feeling threatening. Tonight, though, every shadow between the trees made her tense. She heard footsteps behind her on the snow-covered path, steady and unhurried, and she turned quickly, her heart hammering. Cale stood a short distance away, hands in the pockets of his dark coat, watching her with an expression she could not read. "You shouldn't walk alone out here," he said, "not after dark." "I've lived here my whole life," Elena replied, trying to keep her voice steady. "I know these woods better than anyone." "Knowing a place," Cale said quietly, "does not mean it cannot still surprise you." There was something underneath his words, some deeper meaning she could not quite grasp, and the way he studied her, patient and unblinking, sent her mind straight back to a pair of golden eyes in the snow. "Were you out here 3 nights ago?" she asked suddenly, unable to stop herself. "During the storm?" Something shifted in his expression, quick and controlled, but not quick enough that she missed it entirely. "Why do you ask?" "Because I was attacked. Well, not attacked, but I got lost, and I fell, and something helped me. A wolf. A big white wolf. Bigger than any wolf should be." Cale's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "Wolves don't help people, Elena. They avoid them." "I know what I saw," she said firmly, surprising herself with her own certainty. "It sat with me all night, to keep me warm. It led me to shelter, and in the morning, There was a blanket, folded, like someone had left it for me. For a long moment, Cale said nothing at all. The wind picked up around them, rustling the bare branches overhead, and Elena thought she saw something almost like fear flicker across his controlled features. There and gone so fast, she could not be certain it was real. "You should be careful what stories you tell people in this town," he said finally, his voice low. "Not everyone would believe you. Some might think you were losing your mind." "Are you saying I imagined it?" "I'm saying," Cale replied, stepping slightly closer, close enough that Elena had to tilt her head back to keep looking at him, "that some things are safer left unexplained." Before she could respond, he turned and walked away, disappearing into the deepening darkness between the trees, with the same unhurried, powerful stride she had noticed earlier that day. Elena stood frozen on the path for a long moment, her breath clouding in front of her, her mind racing. She should have felt afraid. Instead, walking the rest of the way home alone, she found herself thinking of golden eyes in the snow and dark gray eyes in candlelight, and how strangely, impossibly similar they felt. That night, sleep did not come easily. Elena lay awake staring at her ceiling, replaying every word Cale had said, every subtle reaction that had crossed his face. She thought about the blanket folded so carefully beside her in the cave, and about a tall figure she thought she had glimpsed at the tree line the next morning, watching her from a distance before vanishing entirely. Around midnight, a howl rose up from somewhere deep in the forest, long and low, different from any sound she had heard before this winter. Elena sat up in bed, her heart pounding, and walked to her window. In the moonlight, at the very edge of her yard where the trees began, she saw it. The white wolf, standing perfectly still, staring directly at her window, as if it had known exactly where to find her. Elena's breath caught in her throat. She pressed her palm against the cold glass, and for one impossible moment, the wolf's gaze seemed to soften, almost gentle, almost sorrowful. Then it turned and disappeared into the trees, leaving nothing behind but silence and unanswered questions that Elena knew, deep in her bones, she would not be able to ignore for much longer. She thought of Cale's warning. Some things are safer left unexplained. But as she climbed back into bed, unable to shake the feeling that her entire world had quietly shifted beneath her feet, Elena knew she had never been very good at leaving things unexplained. Whatever secret connected that wolf and that strange magnetic stranger, she intended to find it. Elena barely slept, and by morning, she had made up her mind. She would go to the one person in town who might know something useful, someone who had lived in these mountains longer than anyone else, and who had never once shied away from strange stories. She pulled on her coat, grabbed her keys, and drove the short distance to Grace's cottage at the far edge of town, where smoke was already curling from the chimney despite the early hour. Grace opened the door before Elena even knocked, as if she had been expecting her. She was well into her 70s, with silver hair pulled into a loose braid and sharp eyes that missed nothing. "You look like someone who saw something they can't explain," Grace said, stepping aside to let her in. Elena hesitated only a moment before the whole story spilled out of her. The howl, the wolf, the fall, the cave, the folded blanket, and finally, Cale. Grace listened without interrupting, her expression unreadable, pouring 2 cups of tea with steady hands as Elena spoke. When Elena finished, Grace set her cup down slowly. "You're not the first person to see a wolf like that in these woods," she said. "My grandmother used to tell stories about them. She called them the hidden ones." "The hidden ones?" "Families that live differently than we do," Grace said carefully, choosing her words like they were fragile. "Old families, going back generations, up in the higher parts of the mountain, where no roads reach. People who keep to themselves, and who are said to change shape under certain skies." Elena felt a chill that had nothing to do with the winter morning. "You're talking about legends." "I'm talking about things people whispered about long before either of us were born," Grace said. "Some called them shifters. Some called them wolfkin. My grandmother swore there was a leader among them, someone the others answered to, someone they called the Alpha King." The words landed strangely in Elena's chest, heavy and electric all at once. The Alpha King. According to the old stories, he protects his people fiercely, and he almost never shows himself to outsiders. If a stranger came asking about him directly, well, my grandmother always said that was asking for trouble. Grace studied Elena carefully. "But you didn't come here asking about legends." You came here because you think you've already met him. Elena did not answer right away, but her silence was answer enough. Be careful, dear, Grace said gently. Whatever that man is to you, wolf or human, or something in between, you've clearly caught his attention. And creatures like that, if the old stories are true, they do not offer their attention lightly. Elena left Grace's cottage with more questions than she had arrived with, but also with a strange, steady certainty settling into her chest. She was not imagining things, she was not losing her mind. Something real and hidden existed in these mountains, something old and careful and powerful, and somehow, impossibly, she had already stepped into the middle of it. She spent the rest of the day at the store, trying to focus on her usual work, restocking shelves, helping customers, making polite conversation with Peter about the weather, but her mind kept drifting back to golden eyes and gray eyes and a name that seemed too simple for a man who felt so complicated. Cale did not come into the store that day. Elena told herself she was not disappointed. She told herself several times, in fact, which was usually a good sign that it was not entirely true. That evening, driven by a restlessness she could not shake, she decided to walk the same path through the woods where she had first heard the howl. She told herself it was to clear her head. She knew, somewhere underneath that thin excuse, that she was hoping to see him again, whichever form he chose to take. The forest was quiet, in a way that felt deliberate, as if it were holding its breath alongside her. Snow crunched softly beneath her boots, and moonlight filtered down through the bare branches overhead, painting silver light across the frozen ground. She walked slower than usual, listening carefully, watching the shadows between the trees. She found him standing near the edge of a small frozen creek, his back to her, hands in his coat pockets, as if he had been waiting there the entire time. You shouldn't be out here alone, Cale said without turning around, his voice carrying easily through the still night air. You seem to say that a lot, Elena replied, stepping closer, despite every instinct telling her to keep her distance. And yet somehow, you always happen to be exactly where I am. He finally turned to face her, and in the moonlight, his pale eyes seemed almost luminous, holding a weight of something ancient and careful behind them. Maybe I worry about you. Or maybe, Elena said, her heart pounding, but her voice steady. You already know exactly why I keep ending up in these woods. Because it's you, isn't it? The wolf. It was you. For a long, tense moment, Cale said nothing at all. The wind stirred the branches above them, and somewhere in the distance, an owl called out into the darkness. Elena held his gaze, refusing to look away, refusing to let him dismiss her with another vague warning. You don't know what you're asking, he said finally, his voice low and rough. If I told you the truth, Elena, there would be no taking it back. Some doors, once opened, cannot be closed again. I'm not afraid, she said, though her heart was pounding hard enough that she wasn't entirely sure that was true. You should be, Cale said quietly. Not of me, but of what my truth would mean for your life from this moment forward. Elena took a breath, steadying herself, and asked the question she had been carrying since the moment she first saw those golden eyes in the snow. Are you the Alpha King? Something shifted behind Cale's controlled expression, a flicker of surprise, quickly masked. Where did you hear that name? Does it matter? Is it true? He studied her for a long moment, as if weighing something heavy and important, and when he finally spoke, his voice carried a quiet, dangerous honesty that sent a shiver down Elena's spine. Careful, Elena, he said softly. Some truths, once spoken aloud, cannot ever be taken back. Are you certain that's a door you want open tonight? Before she could answer, a distant howl rose up through the trees, deep and mournful, followed almost immediately by a second howl, sharper, more urgent, from a completely different direction. Cale's entire body went rigid, his eyes sharpening with sudden alertness that had nothing to do with their conversation. Get back to town, he said quickly, his voice shifting into something commanding, something entirely different from the careful, controlled man she had been speaking with moments before. Now, Elena, go. What's happening? Someone else is in these woods tonight, Cale said, already moving past her, his eyes scanning the tree line with an intensity that made her stomach drop. Someone who should not be here. Please, for your own safety, go home and lock your doors. Elena hesitated only a second before the urgency in his voice finally broke through her curiosity. and she turned and hurried back down the path toward town, her heart pounding, her mind spinning with unanswered questions. Behind her, she heard Cale's voice change entirely, dropping into a low, powerful command that echoed strangely through the trees, though she could not make out the words. She glanced back once, before the trees swallowed the view completely, and in the pale moonlight, she thought she saw his silhouette begin to shift, shoulders broadening, posture lowering, until the shape moving through the darkness was no longer a man at all. Elena ran the rest of the way home, her mind racing faster than her feet, one truth settling firmly into her heart, despite every fear trying to crowd it out. Whatever Cale truly was, wolf or man or something rare in between, she was already far too deep into his world to ever fully turn back. Morning came gray and quiet, the kind of stillness that follows a storm nobody witnessed, but everybody somehow feels in the air. Elena had not slept much, replaying the sound of those two howls over and over, the sharp command in Cale's voice, the way his silhouette had seemed to shift and lower, just before the trees swallowed him from view. She told herself she had imagined that last part. She was not entirely convinced. She was wiping down the counter at the store when the bell rang, and Grace walked in, her expression unusually tense for someone who normally moved through the world with calm, steady patience. "You look like you didn't sleep," Grace said, glancing around to make sure no other customers were within earshot, before lowering her voice. "Something happened last night." "How do you know that?" "Because half the birds on my side of the mountain went quiet before dawn, and that only happens when something serious moves through these woods." Grace leaned against the counter. "Tell me." Elena explained what she could, the two howls, Cale's sudden shift from calm to commanding, his warning to run straight home. Grace listened, with her jaw tightening more with every detail. "That second howl," Grace said slowly. "Sharp, urgent, coming from a different direction. That's not one of ours." "Ours?" "The mountain has always had one pack," Grace said. "One family, keeping to the higher slopes, keeping mostly to themselves. If there was a second howl answering from somewhere else last night, that means someone from outside has crossed into territory that isn't theirs, and that never happens without a reason." Elena felt a cold weight settle in her stomach. What kind of reason? Grace did not answer right away, and her silence told Elena more than words could have. Later that afternoon, as the sky began to dim early, the way it always did in deep winter, Elena found herself once again drawn toward the tree line behind her cabin, unable to stay away, despite every rational thought telling her she should. She had barely stepped past the first row of pines when she heard voices, low and tense, carried faintly on the wind. She crept closer, careful to stay behind the thick trunk of an old fir tree, and peered through the branches toward a small clearing she had never noticed before, hidden by a natural fold in the land. Cale stood there, dressed now in simple dark clothing rather than his fine coat, his posture rigid, commanding, entirely different from the careful, quiet man she had spoken to at the store. Beside him stood another man she did not recognize, younger, with sandy hair and sharp, watchful eyes, standing slightly behind Cale, in a way that suggested deference rather than equality. "Victor's people were seen past the ridgeline last night," the younger man was saying, his voice tight with worry. "That's the second time this month. If he's testing our borders, Cale, we need to respond before he decides testing isn't enough." "I'm aware, Daniel," Cale replied, his voice low and controlled, though Elena could hear the strain beneath it. "Victor has wanted this territory since before either of us were born. He will not stop simply because I ask nicely." "Then let us handle it the way our father would have," Daniel said. "Show strength. Show him what happens when he pushes too far." "And risk exposing everything we have spent generations protecting?" Cale's voice sharpened, cutting through the cold air. "One misstep, Daniel. One confrontation seen by the wrong eyes, and everything falls apart. I will not risk our people's safety, because Victor wants a fight." Elena's breath caught in her throat as she processed what she was hearing. Pack, territory, father. Whatever these men were discussing, it went far deeper and further back than she had imagined. An entire hidden world existing quietly alongside her own, generations old, careful and guarded. A twig snapped beneath her foot. Both men turned instantly, Daniel's body dropping into an alert crouch, Cale's expression shifting from strain to something sharper, more dangerous. Elena froze, her heart slamming against her ribs, caught completely, and with nowhere to hide. Elena. Cale's voice was low, urgent, as he crossed the clearing quickly, closing the distance between them before she could even think to run. You should not be here. I heard voices, she said honestly, too shaken to think of a better excuse. I didn't mean to listen, I got curious, and then I heard names, and territory, and someone called Victor, and Cale. Daniel's voice cut in sharply, tension radiating from every word. She heard everything? Cale did not look away from Elena, his pale eyes searching her face with an intensity that made her chest tighten. How much did you hear? Enough to know this isn't just about wolves passing through, Elena said quietly. Enough to know there's more going on here than strange animals in the snow. A long, heavy silence stretched between them. Daniel shifted uneasily, glancing between Cale and Elena as if waiting for some signal about what should happen next. Elena held her ground, despite her pounding heart, refusing to look away from Cale's searching gaze. You cannot tell anyone what you heard, Cale said finally, his voice quiet, but carrying an unmistakable weight of authority. Not Grace. Not Peter. No one in that town. Do you understand how serious this is? I understand that you're scared of something, Elena said. Someone named Victor. And I understand that whatever you are, whatever your people are, you're trying to protect them from him. Cale's jaw tightened, but something in his eyes softened slightly at her words, as if he had expected accusation or fear, and found instead something closer to understanding. My people have lived quietly in these mountains for generations, hidden from a world that would either hunt us or exploit us if our existence became known. Victor believes strength means claiming territory by force, expanding his reach, no matter the cost to secrecy. I believe our survival depends on staying hidden, staying careful. We do not agree, and that disagreement has cost lives before. Lives, Elena repeated softly, a chill running through her. This is not a simple disagreement between neighbors, Elena, Cale said. This is old, and it is dangerous, and now that you know even this much, you are already more exposed to that danger than I ever wanted you to be. Then tell me the rest, Elena said, surprising herself with her own steadiness. If I'm already exposed, don't leave me standing here half blind to what I'm actually facing. Cale studied her for a long moment, something conflicted playing across his controlled features, before he finally glanced at Daniel and gave a small, reluctant nod. Not here, Cale said. Not tonight. But soon, Elena, I will tell you everything. I only ask that until then, you trust me enough to stay close to town, and to be careful of strangers you do not recognize wandering these woods. Victor's people, Elena guessed. Victor's people, Cale confirmed grimly. And they will not hesitate to use you against me if they learn how much you already know. Elena walked home that evening with her mind spinning faster than it ever had before, fear and fascination twisting together into something she could not quite untangle. She understood now that she had stumbled into something far bigger than a single wolf, or a single mysterious stranger. She had stumbled into an entire hidden world, ancient and guarded, currently balanced on the edge of a conflict that had clearly simmered for far longer than her own short lifetime. And somehow, impossibly, she had already become a part of it. 3 days passed without any sign of Cale, and Elena found herself checking the tree line behind her cabin far more often than she wanted to admit. She kept busy at the store, kept her conversations with customers light and ordinary, and tried to convince herself that the strange world she had glimpsed in that hidden clearing had simply paused, waiting for her to forget it. She knew, deep down, that was not true. On the 4th evening, a knock sounded at her cabin door, firm and steady. Elena opened it to find Cale standing on her porch, snow dusting his shoulders, his expression calmer than she had seen it since their first meeting in the store. "May I come in?" he asked. "What I need to tell you deserves more privacy than a doorstep." She stepped aside, and he entered slowly, glancing around her small living room with quiet curiosity, as if trying to understand her simply from the space she had built around herself. She gestured toward the worn armchair near her fireplace, and he sat, though his posture remained careful, alert, like a man who had spent his whole life ready to move at a moment's notice. "I promised you the truth," Cale said once Elena had settled onto the couch across from him. "So I will give it to you now, all of it, and you may decide afterward whether you wish to remain part of this world or step away from it entirely." Elena nodded, her heart pounding, though she kept her expression steady. My family has lived in these mountains for many generations, Cale began, his voice quiet, measured, carrying the weight of history behind every word. We are not simply people who happen to live near wolves. We are shifters, capable of taking wolf form under certain conditions, and we have protected this land and our secret for longer than this town has existed. The Alpha King, Elena said softly. Cale's mouth tightened slightly. A title passed through my family for generations. My father held it before me, and his father before him. It means I am responsible for the safety and unity of our pack, all the families who call these mountains home. It is not a role I asked for, but it is one I accepted the moment my father passed. And the wolf who saved me in the storm, Elena said. That was you. Yes, Cale admitted. I heard your fall from a distance, and something in me could not simply let a stranger freeze alone in the dark. Even knowing the risk of revealing myself, I told myself it was only compassion. I have since realized it was something more complicated than that. Elena's chest tightened at his words, though she said nothing, waiting for him to continue. Victor, Cale went on, his expression darkening, leads a smaller pack from the northern ridge, beyond the boundary my family has maintained for generations. His family and mine have never agreed on how our kind should survive in a world that no longer believes in creatures like us. My father believed in careful isolation, protecting our secret above all else. Victor believes strength and expansion are the only true paths to safety, that hiding forever means eventually being found and destroyed. So he's been testing your borders, Elena said, remembering the conversation she had overheard. For years, Cale confirmed. Small incursions, careful provocations, always just short of open conflict. But lately, his patience seems to be running thin, and I fear he is preparing for something larger. Why now? Elena asked. Why has it gotten worse recently? Cale hesitated, his pale eyes meeting hers with an intensity that made her breath catch. Because Victor has learned that I have taken a personal interest in someone outside our world, someone human. He sees it as weakness, a vulnerability he can exploit to force my hand. Elena's stomach dropped. Me. You, Cale confirmed quietly. I never intended for you to become tangled in any of this, Elena. I tried to warn you away, tried to keep my distance after that first night in the store. But something about you made that impossible, and I fear my failure to stay away has already placed you in danger. Elena sat with that for a long moment. Fear, and something warmer twisting together inside her chest. You're saying Victor might come after me. To get to you. It is a possibility I cannot ignore, Cale said, his jaw tight. Which is why I need you to understand fully what you are choosing, if you choose to remain close to me. This is not a simple romance from a storybook, Elena. This is old blood, old rivalries, and real danger that could cost you your life if I am not careful enough to protect you. And if I choose to walk away? Elena asked quietly, though even as she said the words, she was not certain she meant them. Then I will make certain Victor understands you are no longer relevant to him, Cale said, though something pained flickered behind his controlled expression as he said it. I will step back from your life entirely, and in time, the danger will fade along with my presence in it. Elena studied him for a long moment, this man who was somehow also the wolf that had saved her life, who carried the weight of generations on his shoulders, who had just offered to remove himself entirely from her world for the sake of her safety. She thought of golden eyes in the snow, warm fur against her cold skin, a folded blanket left behind with quiet, careful thoughtfulness. I don't want you to walk away, she said finally, her voice steadier than she expected. I want to understand this world you're part of. I want to understand you. Something shifted in Cale's expression, relief and worry tangled together in equal measure. You understand the risk you are accepting. I understand that you saved my life once already, Elena said, and that whatever is happening between us, it feels too important to run from, simply because it's dangerous. Cale rose from the armchair and crossed the small distance between them, kneeling slightly so his eyes were level with hers. Then I will do everything within my power to make certain that choice does not cost you everything, Elena. I swear it. The fire crackled softly in the silence that followed, and for a moment, the danger surrounding them both felt distant, held back by the quiet warmth of the room and the steady, careful presence of the man kneeling before her. Elena reached out and took his hand, and Cale did not pull away. Outside, unnoticed by either of them, A pair of sharp eyes watched from the tree line, marking the cabin's location carefully before disappearing silently back into the darkening woods. Victor's scouts had already found what they were looking for. Daniel arrived at Cale's home just after sunrise, his expression tight with urgency, as he strode into the great room, where Cale stood by the tall windows, watching frost creep slowly across the glass. Scouts spotted movement near the human woman's cabin last night, Daniel said without preamble. 2 of Victor's people, watching from the tree line. They left before our patrol could reach them, but there's no mistaking what they were doing. Cale's hands tightened at his sides, his jaw setting into a hard line, confirming her location. That would be my guess, Daniel said grimly. Cale, I understand what she means to you, truly I do. But every day you keep her close. You hand Victor another weapon to use against you. He's not looking for a fight he can win outright. He's looking for leverage. I am aware of what Victor is looking for, Cale said, his voice low and controlled despite the tension radiating through his shoulders. I have known his tactics since we were boys, learning to fight side by side before our fathers turned us into rivals instead of friends. Daniel studied him carefully. Then you understand what needs to happen. Increase her protection, or convince her to leave the mountain until this settles. She will not agree to leave, Cale said, and there was something almost proud beneath the worry in his voice, and I am no longer certain I want her to. Daniel sighed heavily, running a hand through his sandy hair. Then we protect her, quietly, carefully, without drawing more attention than necessary. I will assign trusted patrols near town, close enough to respond quickly if needed. Discreetly, Cale reminded him. The last thing we need is armed men noticed wandering near a small mountain town. Understood, Daniel said, though his expression remained troubled. There's something else, Cale. Word from the northern ridge says Victor has been gathering his closest allies more frequently these past 2 weeks. Meetings held late into the night, careful and secretive even by our standards. Cale's expression darkened further. He's building support for something larger. That would be my read as well, Daniel confirmed. I don't like it, Cale. This feels different from his usual provocations. Meanwhile, in town, Elena had spent the morning trying to focus on ordinary tasks, though her mind kept drifting back to the conversation from the night before, and the quiet, careful way Cale had knelt before her, promising to protect her from a danger she still barely understood. She was restocking a shelf of canned goods when the bell above the door rang, and she turned, expecting Peter or one of the regular customers. Instead, a woman she had never seen before stood just inside the doorway, dressed in a fitted dark coat, her sharp green eyes scanning the store, with an efficiency that felt entirely out of place among the quiet shelves of a small-town shop. "Can I help you find something?" Elena asked, forcing a polite smile despite the uneasy prickle crawling up her spine. "Actually," the woman said, her voice smooth and pleasant, in a way that somehow made Elena more nervous rather than less. "I was hoping you could help me find someone. A man named Cale. I heard he's been spending quite a bit of time in this charming little town lately." Elena's polite smile froze in place. "I'm not sure who you mean." The woman's green eyes sharpened with amusement, as if she found Elena's careful denial entertaining, rather than convincing. "Of course you don't. My name is Lily. I work closely with a man named Victor. Perhaps you've heard that name as well?" Elena's heart began pounding hard against her ribs, though she kept her expression carefully neutral. "I think you have the wrong store." "I don't think I do," Lily said, stepping closer, her tone shifting from pleasant to something colder, sharper. "You see, sweetheart, Victor has been very curious about the young woman who seems to have captured our dear Alpha King's attention so completely. It's rare, you understand, for him to show interest in anyone outside our world. Rare enough that Victor finds it fascinating." "I don't know what you're talking about," Elena said, though her voice trembled slightly despite her efforts to stay calm. Lily smiled, slow and knowing, and leaned in close enough that Elena could smell something faintly like pine and smoke clinging to her coat. "You don't have to pretend with me, Elena. I already know exactly who you are. I simply wanted to see you for myself, to understand what could possibly make Cale so careless." "I think you should leave," Elena said, her voice steadier now, anger beginning to burn through her fear. "I'll leave," Lily said, straightening and moving unhurriedly back toward the door. "But you should know something before I go. Victor does not make idle threats, and he does not lose patience easily either. If Cale continues down this path, Protecting a human over his own people's interests, there will be consequences. I'd hate for you to be caught in the middle of something so much bigger than yourself. The bell rang again as Lily left, and Elena stood frozen behind the counter for a long moment, her hands shaking as she gripped the edge of the register. She had wanted answers, had wanted to understand the world Cale belonged to, but she had not expected the danger to arrive so quickly, so directly, standing right in front of her in her own store. She reached for her phone with trembling fingers and dialed the only number Cale had given her the night before, a small cell phone he said belonged only to matters concerning his world. He answered before the first ring finished. "Elena, what's wrong?" "Someone came to the store," Elena said, her voice shaking despite her attempts to steady it. "A woman named Lily. She said she works with Victor. She knew everything, Cale. About you, about me, about all of it." There was a sharp silence on the other end of the line, followed by Cale's voice, tight with barely controlled anger. "Stay exactly where you are. I am coming to you now." "Cale, she said there would be consequences if you kept protecting me over your own people." "Elena," Cale said, his voice dropping into something fierce and protective that sent a shiver through her despite the fear still coursing through her veins. "Listen to me carefully. Victor wants to frighten you, wants to shake your trust in me, wants to make you believe you are a burden rather than a choice I have made freely. Do not let his games plant doubt in your mind. I am coming, and I will not allow him to touch you." Elena closed her eyes, gripping the phone tightly, drawing strength from the fierce certainty in his voice, even as fear continued twisting through her chest. Whatever was coming, she realized, it was arriving far faster than either of them had prepared for. Cale arrived at the store within minutes, moving through the door with a controlled urgency that made Peter, still stocking shelves near the back, glance up in surprise. Cale ignored him entirely, crossing the small space directly to Elena, his pale eyes searching her face for any sign of harm. "Are you hurt?" he asked, his voice low and tight. "No," Elena said, though her hands were still trembling slightly. "She didn't touch me. She just wanted to make sure I understood how much danger I've apparently put myself in." Cale's jaw tightened, anger flickering behind his controlled exterior. "Lily works closely with Victor, closer than almost anyone else in his circle. If he sent her here directly, it means he wanted you to feel afraid. It means he is trying to provoke exactly the kind of reaction that could give him an excuse to act." "What kind of reaction?" Elena asked. "If I retaliate against Lily for approaching you," Cale explained, "Victor can claim I broke the careful peace between our packs, giving him justification to escalate matters further. He is testing how far he can push me, before I make a mistake he can use against me. So what do we do?" Cale studied her for a long moment before answering. "We do not give him the reaction he wants, but we also cannot pretend this threat does not exist. I want you to stay with me, Elena, somewhere I can protect you properly, at least until this settles." Elena hesitated only briefly before nodding. Whatever fear still lingered from Lily's visit, it was outweighed by a growing certainty that she trusted Cale completely, more than she had trusted anyone in a very long time. That evening, Cale brought her to his home, a large stone house built into the side of the mountain, half hidden by tall pines and centuries of careful concealment. Inside, the rooms were warm and simply furnished, more comfortable than grand, and Elena found herself surprised by how normal it all felt, despite everything she now understood about the man who lived there. Daniel met them in the main hall, his expression grim. "Cale, we have a problem. One of our scouts spotted Victor's people moving equipment near the old logging road at the southern boundary. It looks like preparation for something larger than a simple provocation." "Equipment," Cale repeated, his brow furrowing. "What kind?" "Hard to say from a distance," Daniel admitted, "but it did not look like anything a wolf pack would typically need. This has the feel of something meant for humans, Cale. Traps, weapons, perhaps even recording devices." Elena's stomach tightened. Recording devices? Why would he need those? Cale's expression turned grave as understanding settled over his features. If Victor could capture proof of what we are, evidence that shifters truly exist, he could use it as leverage against every pack in these mountains, mine included. It would force cooperation through fear of exposure, rather than loyalty. "That's insane," Elena said. "He'd be exposing himself too." "Not if he frames it carefully," Cale said grimly. Not if he ensures any evidence points only toward my pack, while his own people remain hidden and safe. Victor has always been patient in his cruelty, Elena. This would not surprise me at all. Daniel shifted uneasily. What do you want to do? Cale was quiet for a long moment, his eyes distant, calculating. We cannot allow him to gather proof, and we cannot allow him to use Elena as a means of forcing my hand. I want increased patrols along the southern boundary immediately, and I want eyes on that equipment before Victor has a chance to use it. And Elena? Daniel asked, glancing toward her. Stays here, under my protection, until this threat has passed, Cale said firmly, leaving no room for argument. Elena did not object. She understood, watching the tension radiating from both men, that this was no longer simply a matter of curiosity or fascination with a hidden world. Real danger was closing in, and she had become an unavoidable part of it whether she wished it or not. Later that night, after Daniel had left to organize the increased patrols, Elena found Cale standing alone on a stone balcony overlooking the dark, snow-covered valley below. She joined him quietly, wrapping her arms around herself against the cold night air. You're worried, she said softly. I have always known Victor was dangerous, Cale admitted, his eyes fixed on the distant tree line. But I underestimated how far he might go to force a conflict he believes will strengthen his position. If he gathers proof of what we are and uses it recklessly, it will not only endanger my pack, it could endanger every hidden family in these mountains. Generations of careful secrecy unraveled in a single reckless move. Then we stop him, Elena said simply. Cale glanced at her, something soft and grateful flickering behind his guarded expression. You continue to place yourself beside me, despite every danger I have warned you about. I told you already, Elena said, meeting his gaze steadily. I'm not running from this, not from you, and not from whatever comes next. Cale reached out slowly, brushing a strand of hair away from her face, with careful, deliberate gentleness. You are either the bravest woman I have ever known, or the most reckless. Maybe both, Elena said, a small smile tugging at her lips, despite the tension still coiled tightly in her chest. For a moment, standing together on that quiet stone balcony, overlooking the sleeping valley, the looming threat of Victor and his schemes felt distant, held back by the warmth building steadily between them. But even as Cale leaned down slowly, his forehead resting gently against hers, both of them understood that this fragile peace would not last much longer. Somewhere beyond the southern ridge, Victor's plans were already moving forward, and neither Cale nor Elena could yet imagine just how far he intended to go. The 2 days passed in tense, careful quiet, patrols moving steadily along the mountain's boundaries, while Cale divided his attention between managing his pack's growing unease and staying close to Elena whenever his responsibilities allowed. On the third morning, Daniel arrived at the stone house with news that made his usual composure crack entirely. Victor requested a meeting, Daniel said, breathless from the fast pace of his approach. Neutral ground, the old meadow near the eastern stream, midday today. He says he wishes to discuss terms before matters escalate further. Cale's eyes narrowed with immediate suspicion. Victor does not request meetings. Victor takes what he wants and forces others to respond. I know, Daniel said grimly, which is exactly why I don't trust this. But if you refuse, and he later claims you avoided peaceful negotiation, it strengthens his position with the smaller packs, who might otherwise remain neutral in this conflict. Cale was silent for a long moment, weighing the risk carefully. I will go, but I will not go alone, and Elena stays here, protected, regardless of what Victor requests. He specifically mentioned wanting the human woman present, Daniel said reluctantly. Said something about wanting to meet the person who has captured the Alpha King's attention so completely. Elena, standing quietly near the doorway, felt her stomach drop. He wants me there. Absolutely not, Cale said immediately, his voice hard with certainty. I will not walk you directly into potential danger, simply because Victor demands it. But if you refuse, Elena said carefully, doesn't that give him exactly the excuse Daniel just described? Proof that you're hiding something, or someone, out of weakness rather than strength. Cale's jaw tightened, clearly torn between protecting her and understanding the political weight of her words. Elena, you do not understand what Victor is capable of. I understand enough, Elena said steadily, and I understand that hiding from this won't make it disappear. If meeting him gives us information, gives us a chance to understand what he's really planning, isn't that worth the risk, especially on neutral ground with your people nearby? Daniel glanced between them, clearly uncomfortable being caught in the middle of the disagreement, but eventually spoke carefully. She's not entirely wrong, Kale. Refusing outright plays into exactly the narrative Victor wants to build. If we go, prepared, with patrols positioned nearby, we control the situation far more than if we simply hide from it. Kale's shoulders remained tense, but after a long, heavy silence, he finally nodded, though clearly against every protective instinct urging him otherwise. Then we go together. And you do not leave my side for even a moment, Elena. Do you understand? I understand, Elena said quietly, though her heart was pounding hard at the thought of finally meeting the man responsible for so much fear and tension. They arrived at the meadow just before midday, the snow there packed down and cleared, suggesting careful preparation ahead of time. Victor stood waiting near the frozen stream, flanked by two of his closest allies, Lily among them, her sharp green eyes finding Elena immediately with an expression of cold curiosity. Victor himself was tall, broad, with a hard, weathered face, and dark eyes that carried none of the careful warmth Elena had come to associate with Kale. He studied Elena openly, without any pretense of politeness, before turning his attention fully toward Kale. So this is her, Victor said, his voice deep and mocking. The human who has made our Alpha King so careless. Say what you came to say, Victor, Kale replied, his voice cold and controlled, despite the tension radiating from his entire body. Victor's mouth curved into something resembling a smile, though it held no warmth at all. Very well. I will be direct, since directness seems to unsettle you far more than careful patience ever could. I know what you are gathering along your southern boundary. Increased patrols, careful preparations. I know you fear I intend something drastic. Do you deny it? Kale asked sharply. I deny nothing, Victor said simply. I have grown weary of hiding in these mountains like frightened animals, Kale. Generation after generation, while the world moves forward without us, changes without us, forgets we ever existed at all. I believe our survival depends on strength, on claiming a place in this world rather than cowering from it forever. And you believe exposing our existence to humans achieves that? Kale's voice carried sharp disbelief. I believe controlled exposure, on our terms, could achieve far more than endless hiding ever will, Victor said, his dark eyes hardening. But that is a conversation for another day. Today, I came only to make something very clear. His gaze shifted back toward Elena, cold and calculating. If you continue allowing a human woman this close to matters that concern our entire hidden world, Kale, I will consider it proof that you are no longer fit to hold your title. Weakness invites challenge. Surely you understand that much at least. Elena is not a weakness, Kale said, his voice low and dangerous. She is a choice I have made freely, and one I will defend against anyone who threatens her. Victor's eyes narrowed slightly, something calculating flickering behind his hard expression. Careful, Kale. Choices have consequences, and I do not think you fully understand yet how far I am willing to go to secure what I believe is best for our future. The tension in the clearing thickened, dangerous and electric, and for a moment, Elena feared the confrontation might turn violent right there in the snow-covered meadow. But Victor, after a long, calculating pause, simply turned and walked away, his allies following closely behind, Lily throwing one last unreadable glance toward Elena before disappearing into the tree line. Kale let out a slow, controlled breath once they were gone, his shoulders finally relaxing slightly from their rigid tension. That went better than I feared, and worse than I hoped. He's not going to stop, Elena said quietly, watching the empty space where Victor had stood moments before. No, Kale agreed grimly, he is not. And I fear our next confrontation will not end with words alone. They walked back toward the stone house in tense silence, both of them aware that whatever fragile peace had existed before today had just cracked irreparably, setting them on a path toward a confrontation neither of them could avoid much longer. That night, Elena woke suddenly to raised voices echoing through the stone house, urgent and sharp. She pulled on her coat quickly and hurried down the hall toward the main room, where Kale stood with Daniel and several other pack members she did not recognize, all of them tense with barely controlled alarm. What's happening? Elena asked, her voice cutting through the tension. Kale turned toward her, his expression grave. Victor's people crossed the southern boundary an hour ago, further than any previous incursion. Our patrols engaged them briefly before they retreated, but not before leaving something behind. Daniel held up a small device, dark and compact, clearly some kind of recording equipment. They wanted this found, Kale. This isn't carelessness, it's a message. Kale's jaw tightened as he took the device, turning it over carefully in his hands. He's showing us he already has the means to capture proof of what we are. This is a warning. A warning of what? Elena asked. That he could expose us at any moment he chooses, Kale said grimly, and that our only way to prevent that exposure is to submit to whatever terms he intends to demand. The room fell into tense silence, broken finally by one of the pack members Elena did not know, an older woman with steady gray eyes. Kale, if Victor is willing to risk exposing all of us, simply to force your submission, we cannot wait passively for his next move. We must act first, decisively, before he decides waiting no longer serves his purposes. And risk exactly the kind of confrontation that could expose us regardless? Kale's voice was sharp with frustration. I will not gamble generations of careful secrecy on a reckless confrontation. Then what do you propose? Daniel asked, his tone urgent. Kale was quiet for a long moment, his eyes distant, calculating every possible path forward. Finally he spoke, his voice heavy with reluctant certainty. I will meet with Victor alone, tonight, and offer him a direct challenge under our oldest traditions. A formal contest between us, witnessed by neutral packs, to settle leadership disputes without exposing our existence to the wider world. A challenge, Daniel repeated slowly. Kale, those contests haven't been used in generations. They're dangerous, and Victor is skilled, stronger perhaps than you in raw physical strength. I am aware of the risk, Kale said quietly, but it is the only path I can see that resolves this without exposing our people to catastrophic danger. If I win, Victor's challenge to my authority ends permanently, and his ambitions toward exposure end with it. If I lose... He did not finish the sentence, but the weight of what he left unsaid hung heavily in the room. No, Elena said suddenly, stepping forward, fear sharpening her voice. There has to be another way. You can't just walk into something that dangerous. Elena, Kale said gently, turning toward her. This is exactly the kind of decision my title requires of me. Protecting my people sometimes means accepting risks I would rather avoid entirely. And if you lose? Elena's voice trembled despite her efforts to stay strong. What happens to your people then? What happens to us? Kale's expression softened, though the grim determination in his eyes did not waver. If I lose, Daniel will take on leadership and continue protecting our people as best he can. And you, Elena, will need to decide for yourself how to move forward. Though I hope, whatever happens, you will remember these past weeks, not with regret, but with the same certainty I have felt since the night I found you lost in that storm. Elena's eyes stung with unshed tears, frustration and fear tangled together in her chest. I don't want a world where that's a possibility, Kale. I don't want to lose you before we've even had a real chance. Kale crossed the room and took her hands gently in his pale eyes steady and warm, despite the danger looming ahead of him. Then trust that I have faced difficult challenges before and survived them, and that I intend to survive this one as well. Not simply for my people's sake, Elena, but for yours. The pack members quietly filed out to prepare for the coming confrontation, leaving Kale and Elena alone in the dim firelight of the main room. Elena studied his face carefully, memorizing every detail, refusing to let fear rob her of this moment together. Promise me something, she said softly. Anything, Kale replied. Promise me you'll come back, she said, her voice breaking slightly, despite her efforts to stay composed. Not just for your people, for me. Kale leaned down slowly, resting his forehead gently against hers, his voice quiet but fierce with certainty. I promise you, Elena, whatever tomorrow brings, I intend to return to you. This is not the end of our story. It is only the beginning of the hardest chapter we will face together. Outside, snow began falling softly once again, blanketing the mountain in quiet, watchful silence, while somewhere beyond the southern ridge, Victor prepared for a confrontation that would decide far more than simple leadership between two rival packs. It would decide everything. Morning arrived cold and clear, The sky, an almost painful shade of blue, stretched over the white peaks of the mountain. Elena stood at the edge of the same hidden meadow where they had first confronted Victor, wrapped tightly in her coat, watching as members from 3 neutral packs gathered slowly around the clearing, called upon to witness the old tradition Kale intended to invoke. Daniel stood close beside her, his expression tense but resolute. "The witnesses will ensure fairness," he said quietly, as if trying to reassure himself as much as her. "Neither side can claim foul play once this begins. It is the safest way to settle this, given the circumstances." "Safest," Elena repeated softly, watching Kale stand at the center of the clearing, calm and still, despite the enormous weight resting on his shoulders. "I don't think anything about this feels safe." Victor arrived shortly after, flanked by Lily and several others from his pack, his expression carrying the same cold confidence Elena remembered from their first meeting. He studied Kale across the clearing, with something like anticipation, as if he had been waiting a long time for exactly this moment. "You honor the old traditions," Victor said, his voice carrying easily across the quiet meadow. "I did not expect that from you, Kale." "I honor them because they exist for exactly this reason," Kale replied evenly. "To settle disputes between our kind, without dragging the wider world into conflicts that are not theirs to witness." Victor's mouth curved into a thin smile. Careful words for a man about to fight for everything he claims to protect. The eldest witness present, a silver-haired man from one of the neutral packs, stepped forward and raised his hand, silencing the tension crackling between them. "The terms are simple. This contest will be decided in wolf form, first to yield or first unable to continue. No weapons, no interference from either side. The victor's claim to authority over the contested boundary stands unquestioned, and the terms are binding under our oldest law." Both Kale and Victor nodded their understanding, and Elena's heart pounded painfully as she watched Kale begin removing his coat, handing it silently to Daniel before stepping toward the center of the clearing. "Kale," she said suddenly, unable to stop herself, stepping forward despite Daniel's hand attempting to hold her back. Kale turned toward her, and for one brief moment, the calm resolve on his face softened into something warmer, something meant only for her. "I will come back to you," he said quietly, echoing the promise from the night before. "Trust me." Elena nodded, though tears blurred her vision as she stepped back to stand beside Daniel, watching as Kale and Victor moved to opposite ends of the clearing. What happened next unfolded almost too quickly for Elena to fully process. Both men shifted in fluid, powerful motions, clothing falling away as fur rippled into place, until 2 enormous wolves stood facing each other across the snow-covered meadow, one pure white, the other a deep, dark gray. The transformation, which Elena had only glimpsed once before in shadowed distance, was breathtaking and terrifying to witness fully in daylight. The wolves circled each other slowly, tension coiling visibly through powerful muscles, before Victor lunged first, fast and aggressive, testing Kale's defenses immediately. Kale sidestepped with practiced control, avoiding the brunt of the attack, though Victor's claws caught his shoulder, drawing a sharp sound of pain that made Elena's chest tighten painfully. The fight continued, brutal and fast, each wolf testing the other's strength and speed, neither gaining a clear advantage for several long, agonizing minutes. Elena watched, her hands clenched tightly at her sides, forcing herself not to look away, despite every instinct urging her to close her eyes against the intensity unfolding before her. Victor pressed his advantage with raw, aggressive power, driving Kale backward toward the edge of the clearing. But Kale, despite absorbing several painful strikes, remained composed, watching carefully for an opening, rather than matching Victor's reckless aggression. When Victor finally overextended, driven by growing frustration at Kale's careful defense, Kale moved with sudden, decisive speed, using Victor's own momentum against him and driving him hard into the snow. Victor struggled fiercely, but Kale held his position with steady, controlled strength, refusing to release his advantage despite Victor's continued efforts to break free. Long moments passed, tense and uncertain, until finally, with visible reluctance, Victor's body went still beneath Kale's hold, a low sound of submission rumbling from his throat. The clearing fell into complete silence, broken only by the sound of both wolves' heavy breathing. Kale released his hold slowly, stepping back, allowing Victor to rise unsteadily to his feet, both wolves shifting back into human form moments later. exhaustion and old rivalry etched deeply into their expressions. "The contest is decided," the silver-haired witness announced formally. "Cale's authority stands unquestioned. Victor, you are bound by our oldest law to respect this outcome and withdraw your claims against the southern boundary." Victor, breathing hard, blood trickling from a shallow wound along his side, met Cale's eyes with something complicated, resentment mixed reluctantly with something almost like respect. "You fight better than I expected." "You fought with skill as well," Cale replied evenly, extending a hand toward his former rival, despite the tension still lingering between them. "This does not need to remain a war between us, Victor. There is room in these mountains for both our people to survive, without exposing ourselves to unnecessary danger." Victor studied Cale's offered hand for a long, tense moment, before finally accepting it, a grudging truce settling uneasily between two men who had spent years locked in careful hostility. "Perhaps," Victor said quietly, "perhaps, there is another way forward after all." Elena let out a breath she felt like she had been holding for hours, relief flooding through her so powerfully, her knees nearly buckled. Daniel caught her gently, steadying her, as Cale, exhausted but victorious, made his way across the clearing toward her. "You came back," Elena said softly, as he reached her, forgetting entirely about the gathered witnesses still watching. "I promised you I would," Cale replied, his voice rough with exhaustion but warm with quiet certainty. She stepped into his arms without hesitation, careful of his injured shoulder, and he held her close, despite the cold and the exhaustion still weighing heavily on his body. Around them, the neutral witnesses began quietly dispersing, the old law satisfied, the dangerous conflict finally, carefully resolved without the world beyond these mountains ever learning the truth of what had unfolded in that snow-covered meadow. In the weeks that followed, peace settled slowly but steadily over the mountain, Victor's ambitions toward exposure fading into cautious cooperation, the fragile trust between the two packs beginning, gradually, to heal. Elena remained by Cale's side, learning more each day about the hidden world she had stumbled into that first stormy night. No longer a frightened outsider, but someone woven carefully and permanently into its quiet, guarded fabric. One evening, as snow fell softly outside the stone house windows, Cale found her standing at the same balcony where they had first admitted their growing feelings for each other, and he wrapped his arms gently around her from behind, resting his chin against her shoulder. "Do you regret it?" he asked quietly, following that howl into the storm. Elena leaned back against him, watching the snow drift peacefully down over the valley below, thinking of golden eyes in the darkness, and a folded blanket left with quiet, careful thoughtfulness, and a dangerous, beautiful world she now called her own. "Not for a single moment," she said softly. And beneath a sky full of slow-falling snow, with the mountain finally settling into peaceful quiet around them, Elena knew without any doubt that she had found exactly where she was always meant to be.